the late 18th century, France looked like the most powerful kingdom in Europe, and at the same time, like a machine built to grind itself apart. It was rich in land and talent, proud of its culture, feared for its armies, and governed by a monarchy that still spoke the language of divine right. Yet beneath the glitter of Versailles lay a state in chronic financial crisis, a society organized by inherited privilege, and a political system that had forgotten how to listen. For generations, the French crown had fought expensive wars to project power abroad. Victory in the 7 Years' War slipped away, leaving humiliation and debt. Then came intervention in the American War of Independence. Revenge against Britain, yes, but also another vast, loan-funded gamble. France helped the Americans win, and in doing so, imported more than military lessons. Officers returned home having watched colonists argue that sovereignty could rest with a people rather than a king. Pamphlets crossed the Atlantic alongside cargo. The revolution in America did not cause the French Revolution, but it sharpened French awareness that political life could be rearranged. The more immediate trigger was arithmetic. The monarchy's budget was broken. Interest payments swallowed revenue. Reformers, ministers like Turgot, Necker, and Calonne, proposed changes that sound technical but were politically explosive. Broaden the tax base, make nobles pay, rationalize collection, reduce exemptions. France's tax system was a patchwork of privileges and regional rules, with many burdens falling on those least able to resist. The nobility and clergy enjoyed exemptions and rights that were not merely economic but symbolic, a public confirmation that society was ranked by birth. When the crown tried to force reforms through the Parlement, high courts dominated by nobles who registered royal edicts, those courts resisted, presenting themselves as defenders of law against ministerial tyranny. It was a paradox that would recur, privileged bodies speaking the language of liberty. The state drifted toward bankruptcy. By 1788, with credit collapsing, Louis XVI made a decision that would open a door he could not close. He summoned the Estates General, an assembly that had not met since 1614. The Estates General was built on an old idea, that French society consisted of 3 estates: clergy, nobility, and everyone else. The third estate was the overwhelming majority: peasants, artisans, urban workers, and the growing bourgeois world of lawyers, merchants, and office holders. The problem was voting. If each estate voted as a bloc, the first 2 could outvote the third 2-1, despite representing a fraction of the population. The third estate demanded voting by head, and it demanded something deeper: recognition that it embodied the nation. In the spring of 1789, as deputies arrived at Versailles, France was already tense. Harvest failures had driven bread prices up. In a society where bread was the central calorie, the price of a loaf could decide whether families ate or rioted. Hunger sharpened political anger. Political uncertainty magnified hunger. Across the kingdom, communities drafted cahiers de doléances, lists of grievances. They complained about taxes, feudal dues, arbitrary justice, and the sense that privilege had become a permanent insult. When the Estates General opened in May, procedure turned into a constitutional crisis. Weeks passed in argument. Then, in June, the Third Estate took an audacious step. It declared itself the National Assembly. It claimed the right to legislate for France. When the deputies found their meeting hall closed, they gathered in an indoor tennis court and swore not to separate until France had a constitution. The tennis court oath was not a battle, but it was a revolution in political imagination. Authority was no longer a gift descending from the crown. It was a mandate rising from representation. Louis XVI wavered, and wavering proved fatal. Troops gathered around Paris and Versailles, and rumors spread that the king would dissolve the assembly by force. In Paris, fear turned into action. On July 14, 1789, crowds moved on the Bastille, a fortress prison that held only a handful of inmates but loomed large as a symbol of arbitrary royal power. The assault was bloody and chaotic. The governor was killed, his head carried through the streets. The fall of the Bastille mattered less for what it released than for what it announced. The capital would not be governed against its will. The countryside convulsed next. In the great fear of the summer of 1789, peasants and villagers, hearing rumors of brigands and aristocratic plots, attacked manor houses and burned records of feudal obligations. This was not simply lawlessness. It was a targeted assault on the paperwork of subordination. The National Assembly responded on the night of August 4th by abolishing feudal privileges. The moment has often been remembered as an outburst of generosity, but it was also triage. France was coming apart, and legislators tried to cut away the old order to save the nation. Weeks later, the Assembly issued the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. It proclaimed liberty, property, security, resistance to oppression. It declared that sovereignty resided in the nation. It promised equality before the law. Its language was universal, and that universality would become both its power and its unresolved challenge. Who counted as a citizen? Which rights were truly inalienable? The Declaration set a standard that future generations would wield like a measuring stick, against kings, against empires, and sometimes against the revolutionaries themselves. In October 1789, another turning point arrived from an unexpected direction. Parisian women, facing bread shortages and furious at royal indecision, marched to Versailles. They demanded food and accountability. The royal family was brought back to Paris, installed in the Tuileries Palace under the watchful gaze of the capital. The monarchy was no longer distant and sacral. It was present, vulnerable, and increasingly trapped. The revolution now entered its first attempt at stable constitutional governance. The civil constitution of the clergy in 1790 reorganized the Catholic Church in France, turning priests into state-paid officials and requiring an oath of loyalty. This was a seismic change in a country where religion structured daily life. Many clergy refused the oath. They became refractory priests. The revolution, which had begun by attacking privilege, now began to fracture families and villages along lines of faith and loyalty. In 1791, the Assembly completed a constitution that created a constitutional monarchy. Yet the king's behavior undermined it. In June 1791, Louis XVI attempted to flee France in disguise. He was recognized at Varennes and brought back. The flight shattered trust. A king who tried to escape his own revolution could hardly be the anchor of its constitution. Outside France, European monarchies watched with alarm. In August 1791, the Declaration of Pillnitz, issued by Austria and Prussia, signaled concern for the French royal family and hinted at intervention. Within France, revolutionaries interpreted such statements as threats. War, many believed, would defend the revolution and expose traitors. In April 1792, France declared war on Austria and soon on Prussia. War radicalized everything. It demanded unity, punished dissent, and made political opponents appear not merely wrong, but dangerous. By the summer of 1792, Paris seethed with suspicion. On August 10th, insurgents attacked the Tuileries. The monarchy fell. The king was suspended and imprisoned. In September, as foreign armies advanced and prisons filled with suspected counter-revolutionaries, mobs carried out the September massacres, killing prisoners in Paris. The revolution, which had promised rights and law, now revealed its capacity for political violence unleashed by fear. A new assembly, the National Convention, declared France a republic. It put Louis XVI on trial for treason. The decision to execute a king was more than a punishment. It was a statement that sovereignty had changed hands irreversibly. In January 1793, Louis was guillotined. Later that year, Marie Antoinette followed. The guillotine itself became a symbol of the era. Presented as a humane, equal method of execution, it embodied the revolution's strange blend of rationalism and terror. France now faced crisis on multiple fronts: war abroad, rebellion at home, and bitter factional struggle in Paris. In the West, the Vendée erupted in royalist and Catholic revolt, met by brutal repression. The convention created the Committee of Public Safety, a small body that became the executive engine of revolutionary government. Maximilien Robespierre emerged as a leading figure, associated with the Jacobins and with a vision of virtue enforced by vigilance. Under the law of suspects and revolutionary tribunals, the state expanded surveillance and punishment. The period known as the Terror, roughly 1793 to 1794, saw tens of thousands executed or killed in prisons and civil conflicts. It was not a single uniform policy so much as an escalating logic. In a republic at war, enemies were imagined everywhere. To save liberty, the revolution authorized extraordinary coercion. Yet the Terror was also a time of intense experimentation. The government attempted price controls, requisitions, and mass conscription, the levée en masse, mobilizing society for total war in a way that anticipated modern states. It altered calendars, promoted civic festivals, and tried to replace traditional religious authority with revolutionary civic religion. Robespierre's Festival of the Supreme Being in 1794, staged as a moral alternative to both Catholicism and atheism, revealed the revolution's desire not only to change institutions, but to reshape hearts. The Terror eventually devoured its architects. Political life in revolutionary Paris became a contest over who was sufficiently pure. In July 1794, during the month of Thermidor in the revolutionary calendar, Robespierre was arrested and executed. The Thermidorian reaction that followed pulled France away from the most radical phase. The prisons opened, the Jacobin clubs weakened, the political temperature shifted. But stability remained elusive. The Directory, established in 1795, was a government of 5 directors meant to prevent dictatorship. It presided over corruption, economic hardship, and continued war. The revolution had dismantled the old order, but it struggled to build a widely accepted new one. Out of this instability rose a general whose career was forged by revolutionary warfare: Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1799, he seized power in the coup of 18 Brumaire. Many French citizens, exhausted by years of upheaval, accepted authoritarian order as the price of peace. Napoleon would eventually crown himself emperor, an act that seemed to close the revolutionary circle back toward monarchy. And yet, the world Napoleon built carried the revolution's imprint. The Napoleonic Code enshrined equality before the law, property rights, and secular authority, while also limiting women's rights and reinforcing patriarchal control. The revolution's promise and its exclusions traveled together. The French Revolution's impact is hard to overstate, because it did not merely change France, it changed the vocabulary of politics. It popularized the idea that nations are made by citizens, not subjects. It accelerated the decline of feudal structures across Europe. It demonstrated the power of mass mobilization, both in the streets and on battlefields. It also provided a grim lesson in how quickly ideals can justify repression when fear and moral certainty combine. Some of the revolution's most revealing stories live in its lesser-known corners. The role of women, for example, was central and contested. Women marched, petitioned, and organized political clubs. They helped drive events at key moments, yet formal political rights were denied to them. Olympe de Gouges responded to the Declaration of the Rights of Man with her 1791 Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Female Citizen, insisting that universal rights that excluded half the population were not universal at all. She was executed during the Terror, a reminder that revolutionary politics could be both visionary and intolerant. Another underappreciated dimension is the revolution in slavery and empire. In the French colony of Saint-Domingue, enslaved people launched a revolt in 1791 that became the Haitian Revolution. Under pressure of war and insurrection, France abolished slavery in its colonies in 1794, an extraordinary decision for a European power of the era. But the story did not end in triumph. Napoleon later moved to restore slavery, and Haiti fought on to declare independence in 1804. The French Revolution's language of rights echoed far beyond Europe, and those echoes could become weapons in the hands of the oppressed. Even the famous symbols carry complex meanings. The tricolor cockade and flag represented the merging of Paris and the monarchy, then the nation and the republic. The term sans-culottes, originally a mockery of working-class men who wore trousers rather than aristocratic knee breeches, became a badge of political identity. The revolution created modern political categories, left and right, born from seating arrangements in the assembly, and modern practices of propaganda, public festivals, and national anthems. La Marseillaise, composed in 1792, was a war song before it became a national hymn, and its fierce lyrics reflect a republic born under siege. Modern debates still orbit the revolution's central questions. How far can a society go in remaking itself before it begins to destroy the very freedoms it claims to secure? When does emergency power become a habit? Can equality before the law coexist with vast inequality of wealth? The revolution also forces confrontation with the gap between universal principles and lived reality. Rights proclaimed in grand declarations often arrive unevenly, contested by gender, class, race, and colonial status. And yet, for all its violence and contradictions, the French Revolution remains one of history's great turning points, because it made politics a matter of public argument on an unprecedented scale. It taught that legitimacy could be claimed in the name of a nation, that citizens could demand constitutions, that old hierarchies could be dismantled, and that new forms of power could rise in their place. In its most hopeful moments, it imagined a society governed by law rather than birth. In its darkest moments, it showed how easily a revolution can become a tribunal. To understand the French Revolution is to watch a society attempt to rebuild itself while standing in the wreckage of its past. It begins with fiscal ledgers and breadlines, moves through declarations and crowds, and ends with armies and codes of law. It is a story of ordinary people forcing the gates of history open, and of the peril that follows when the future arrives faster than institutions, habits, and human patience can bear.